Friday morning edition of Believe in White Sox here on the Believe Network. I'm Greg Miraz, your host as always. We've been gone for a little over a week and a half. I've been busy with work. You have to understand that sometimes this show is not a priority. When the White Sox are 15-35, the show is not always a priority. But make sure that you like and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for the show, make sure that you hit them up in the review section on any of your podcast platforms, preferably Apple Pods, because that is the easiest place to read ratings and reviews. Also, you can make comments on the YouTube videos. I know that it's not necessarily that attractive to be looking at me just talking all the time, but I think that there is some value in actually doing the YouTubes and going to continue to get better to try and clip things. And if we have things that we want to get highlighted on, I think that helps generate more things on social. But again, like from the perspective of we're 50 games in at this point, we're exactly 50 games in as the White Sox get set to begin a 3-game series tonight down at Rate Field against the Texas Rangers before they head back on the road for a 3-game series against the New York Mets. And then they will follow that up by a 3-game series at the surprisingly struggling Baltimore Orioles before coming home to begin June with a 4-game set against the Tigers and a 3-game set against the Kansas City Royals. I have looked at the last couple of series, and there have been things to be encouraged by. The White Sox played really, really well in Cincinnati. You know, you take 2 of 3 in Cincinnati against a Reds team that is getting better, and this White Sox pitching staff just continues to impress. Jonathan Cannon has gotten a lot better over the course of his last couple of starts. Davis Martin has been, I would say, the second best starting pitcher on the staff, and Shane Smith has been pretty darn good as well. The White Sox have tried to piece it together with whoever that 5 spot is, and the revelation of Adrian Hauser, who, look, I don't know why a team would sign a guy to a guaranteed 1-year deal when you have no chance of making the playoffs. The only thing that I can think of is somewhat similar to what the White Sox did on the minor league deal last year with Tommy Pham, is if you have the ability to trade a guy, you should find a way to boost his value and be able to trade him. I mean, Adrian Hauser, if he proves to be good, like if he really proves to be good, then I think that there's an opportunity for you to deal him for somebody at the deadline. Now, he was pitching in AAA earlier this year, I believe, with the Texas Rangers. I'm going to look that up, but people remember Adrian Hauser from his time with the Milwaukee Brewers when he was a pretty consistently good 3 or 4 starter. And given what the White Sox gave him in terms of actual money, he could prove to be a huge value if he pitches well in June and July and you can find a way to trade him. So to me, this is a roster move that fills 2 needs. And he was not pitching that well. He was with the Texas Rangers. He was not pitching that well down at AAA Round Rock, an ERA of 5 in 9 starts. But that goes without saying that the Pacific Coast League has a lot more hitter-friendly ballparks than most of Major League Baseball. So maybe an ERA of 5 in the PCL can equate to an ERA of like 4.15 in Major League Baseball. And that's what Adrian Hauser has been over the course of his career. I mean, he's a career ERA of 4.17 in just a little over 614 innings of work over the course of his career. His last 2 years with the Brewers, he had a 4.73 ERA and a 4.12 ERA. 2021 was probably his best year, a 3.22 ERA in 142 and a third innings of work. So I think that this signing proves 2 needs. It fills a hole in the rotation that you really didn't have anybody else to fill with the injury to Martin Perez and the lack of desire in terms of trying to piece it together with your bullpen, which has proved to be probably the second worst aspect of this White Sox team through the course of the first 50 games. I'd say the starting rotation is definitely the best part of it. I would say the second best part of it is probably the production of their infield. And then I would say, and that excludes first base, and that's going to be the main focus of this show here today. Now, I would say the outfield is probably the least productive spot. But the thing that is frustrating is Chris Getz's roster construction does not make a whole lot of sense. Simply put, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the reason it doesn't make a whole lot of sense is because they are prioritizing the wrong things. When you're in a situation like the White Sox are, you need to prioritize getting your future as many at-bats as humanly possible. And for the entirety of the month of April and the early part of May, everybody wanted to see what Tim Elko could do at the major league level. Well, Tim Elko finally came up and, per StatCast, had two of the hardest hit balls all season long. And I believe that when it comes to somebody that is of his age, all right, Tim Elko is going to be 27 years old in December. He's a 26-year-old rookie. You give that guy as much rope as you can at the big league level. And look, the average wasn't there. 161 average, on base of only 188 in 10 games. It's 32 plate appearances, 31 at-bats. That's not a large sample size. And he hit 3 home runs, including one at Wrigley, including a 3-run homer in the series finale against the Marlins that ended up helping the White Sox win the game. And I was going to record this show last night for the purposes of publishing it in the morning. I was about to start. I was going to get everything set up. And then I started scrolling Twitter. And I will pull out my phone for dramatic effect, because this is the report that came out from Cam Freeman at C. Freeman Scout, who is a freelance writer for Prospecting 411. Tim Elko is back in Charlotte and is expected to be officially optioned tomorrow. 3 guys on rehab in Charlotte, including Andrew Benintendi and Mike Tauchman, were both not in the lineup tonight for the Knights. So there's somebody on the ground in Charlotte, North Carolina, that is effectively reporting that Tim Elko, while still on the Major League roster, is physically back in Charlotte, which means he's getting sent down. And what that means is that Andrew Vaughn is going back to being the everyday first baseman, and you're going to have some form of Mike Tauchman and Andrew Benintendi as the DH. Now, I would sincerely hope that if Mike Tauchman is back on the Major League roster and Austin Slater got put back on the Major League roster and they optioned Brooks Baldwin, I would hope that you would find a way to get Joshua Palacios off this roster, because I have no idea why he is actually on this roster. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that Chris Getz decided it was more important to play guys that have no future in the organization than to let somebody that is universally praised throughout the organization, that gets his shot, has had impactful hits at times, and you send him back down to Charlotte in favor of Andrew Vaughn. There's an unfortunate theory, an unfortunate practice, I should say, in player development, and that is hanging on to top prospects for too long. And this is what I mean. I saw it all the time when I was working in the minor leagues. Organizations feel like they have to get every single little thing out of every prospect they have. Every single little thing. It does not matter if they have failed for 3 years in a row. If you are a first-round pick, if you are a first-round selection, in the Major League Baseball first-year player draft, you are going to get an opportunity no matter what. And I want to point to somebody from another organization, and the reason I make mention of this is because Chris Getz had worked in the Royals organization. Have any of you ever heard of Bubba Starling? Bubba Starling was a high school draftee out of Gardner Edgerton High School in Gardner, Kansas. He was the 5th overall pick in the first round of the 2011 MLB first-year player draft. I want to give you the top 10 of that draft. Garrett Cole, Danny Holtzen, Trevor Bauer, Dylan Bundy, Bubba Starling, Anthony Rendon, Archie Bradley, Francisco Lindor, Javier Baez, and Corey Spangenberg. Other than Starling and Danny Holtzen, all 8 of those other guys in the top 10 had significant major league careers. Javi Baez was an impactful player on the 2016 World Series champion Chicago Cubs team. Francisco Lindor was an impactful player on the 2016 American League champion Cleveland Indians at the time team. Bubba Starling didn't make his major league debut until 2019. Bubba Starling, over the course of 2 years, played a grand total of 91 Major League Baseball games. In 2 seasons in the majors, given an 8-year rope to be able to find his way to the bigs, hit 204 in 91 Major League games, 8 years after being drafted. But why was he given that opportunity? He was given that opportunity because he was the 5th overall pick. And the Royals could not, in theory, and look, I worked in the Royals organization. I think that they are one of the best run player development systems in all of baseball. Their people are amazing. I love everyone at the Kansas City Royals that I had a chance to deal with. They are awesome people. But that's just one example. That's nothing on the Royals. That is how Major League Baseball organizations operate with top draft picks. And that's exactly how the White Sox are operating with Andrew Vaughn. Chris Getz, even though he was not the one that drafted Andrew Vaughn, he was the director of player development when Andrew Vaughn briefly came through the minor leagues on his way to being on the 2021 opening day roster. Remember, Andrew Vaughn was drafted in 2019. There were no minor leagues in 2020. So Andrew Vaughn barely had any development at the minor league level. And if the reports that came out on Twitter a few weeks ago are true, there's a lot to be concerned with in terms of Andrew Vaughn's work ethic. And guess what? That report came out a couple of weeks ago, and we saw it prove positive in one of the games of the Cup Series. The Saturday of the Cup Series, he swings at strike 3. It pops out of the Cub catcher's glove. I can't remember who the Cub catcher was at the time. And he doesn't realize he doesn't run down to first. And he's not in the lineup the next day. There's nothing left of Andrew Vaughn, which is why it's so frustrating that the White Sox chose to keep Andrew Vaughn on this big league roster, who seemingly has no future with the organization, as opposed to letting somebody that does, in Tim Elko, have his opportunity to swim at the big league level. How can you look at Tim Elko's minor league stats and then look at his major league stats and say that he needs more development at the minor league level? Maybe he just hasn't caught up to major league pitching yet, but he has hit some pretty hard home runs. And by the way, he gets sent down a day after going 2 for 4. He went 2 for 4 in the Thursday game against the Mariners, or Wednesday game, I should say. The only reason I can think of that Andrew Vaughn is getting preferential treatment is, and this is what I would like to think, is that the White Sox want him to play his way into being a trade asset. If he can play his way into being a trade asset, and I'll tell you exactly where he should go. He should go to the San Francisco Giants. The San Francisco Giants need bats. The San Francisco Giants are in a position to where they can make the playoffs. Andrew Vaughn is from Northern California. He went to Cal. There's no reason why the White Sox can't get some form of return from the Giants in exchange for Andrew Vaughn. Anything in return at this point for him is better than nothing. Especially if you feel like, even if you're not going to be willing to admit it, even if you feel like you have your next first baseman in Tim Elko. And people might be saying, well, he's 26 years old. You know what? He could end up playing till he's 38 years old. You get a 12-year Major League first baseman, I think you're good with that. The White Sox didn't have Jose Abreu for 12 years. The White Sox had Paul Konerko for 12 years, but that's a rarity. The White Sox had Frank Thomas for over 12 years. That's a rarity. Doesn't matter what age you start. If you're good and you can hit for power, then you're good and you can hit for power. And then the construction around the outfield, I mean, I know that Brooks Baldwin was struggling, but I don't want him on this. I don't want guys that don't have a future on this team. And Brooks Baldwin can play everywhere. I mean, yeah, he was hitting 215, on base at 257, OPS of 588. Not good. And a bunch of his advanced metrics are significantly worse than where they were last year. You know, but he still should be on the team. I don't get certain situations why Chris Getz won't let a younger outfielder. Like, if you want to have outfielders on the roster, if you want to have some guys that have some versatility, put Baldwin on the roster and have him play some form of the corner outfield every single day. There's no reason Joshua Palacios should be on this roster. Joshua Palacios is almost 30 years old and has had no significant form of a major league career. Why is this guy on the team? There's no purpose that he serves actually being on this team. None. And at this point, I don't know what the purpose of Andrew Vaughn being on this team is. Other than the fact that they want to salvage something out of the guy that was supposed to be the next franchise first baseman. Because that's the guy that you drafted. And it's funny, like, I don't want to go like revisionist history, but I want to take a look back real quick at, and granted, there's some guys that, you know, two guys that were picked before him that you'd rather have had, Adley Rutschman and Bobby Witt Jr. But J.J. Bleday has had a decent career. C.J. Abrams, solid enough. Nick Lodolo, I think, is going to end up being a stud. You know, Hunter Bishop, who got picked 10th overall by the Giants, has yet to see his way to the majors. You know, there's a lot of guys. I mean, there are a lot of players in this first round that have yet to be proven. But, I mean, you've got the Anthony Volpes of the world. You've got the Michael Bushes of the world. Hey, Corey Lee was in this draft. He was in this first round. So, Corbin Carroll. You know, I think that that's something that a lot of people say, like, oh, Corbin Carroll got taken by the Diamondbacks 16th overall in this draft. Wish we could have had Corbin Carroll. Josh Jung, who the Rangers took after the White Sox took Andrew Vaughn. He's had a up and down start to his big league career, but his rookie season in 2023, 23 homers in 122 games, nothing to scoff at. I want this roster to be built for the future, not for the present. Tim Elko got wronged. There's a younger outfielder, whether it's Brooks Baldwin or somebody else, that deserves a roster spot over Joshua Palacios. This team should be playing Edgar Caro every day and Matt Thaiss minimally. And even so, like, Edgar Caro's a switch hitter. Put Corey Lee in there. Corey Lee should be the backup, not Matt Thaiss. There's no future in Matt Thaiss. There's no future in a majority of these players other than Chase Meidroth. And Chase Meidroth has basically completely played himself into being roster-proofed. There's no way he can get sent down. Chase Meidroth will never see the minor leagues again. And that is what I was hoping for Tim Elko. Tim Elko better be back up in the next couple of weeks, because what they did to him was wrong. The one positive, though, that I'm taking away from what the White Sox are at this point in terms of roster construction is I feel like there are some clearly defined roles for the future in terms of guys on the infield that are going to be here for a long time. I know that it is a stretch to say, even after a 47-game sample, it might be a stretch to say, oh, Lenyn Sosa is this team's everyday second baseman for the future. And maybe it is. But Lenyn Sosa is finally starting to produce at a rate that is requisite with keeping him around. 272, 4 homers, 13 RBI. Granted, that's not great, but it's a lot better than a lot of the other White Sox are doing. And I think that if Lenyn Sosa can learn to draw a few more walks, he's only got 4 walks drawn in the year. That's why his on base is 289 with an average of 272. I think he could be a lot better. Chase Meidroth, I think, is going to be, and here's the biggest question I think that a lot of people, and this is where the whole Colson Montgomery factor comes in his development. Meidroth can play short, he can play second. Is he this team's everyday shortstop of the future? Is he this team's everyday second baseman of the future? And then it kind of goes into the question, well, if Colson Montgomery ends up being an everyday piece, then what happens to Lenyn Sosa? But then you get the Miguel Vargas part of it to where you're starting to see when he's good how productive offensively Miguel Vargas can be. And I think there have been flashes at times that have shown us that, this is a reason why Miguel Vargas was once a top prospect in the Dodger organization. He's the team leader in home runs and runs batted in for a reason. He's a team leader in extra base hits. I'm impressed with what Miguel Vargas is when he's at his best. And I think he'll continue to get better. So I think that at least for 2026, you've got 3 guys on the infield that I think are going to be future pieces beyond next year, beyond 2027. Or at least I am sure of that with Chase Meidroth. I'm not nearly as positive of that with Lenyn Sosa, and I'm still open to the White Sox upgrading at third base, but I think that if Miguel Vargas develops into the player that they want him to be, I think that he can be that guy. We're seeing flashes of brilliance from him. The outfield is so murky at this point, and that's why I'd rather have Brooks Baldwin on the roster. Maybe Brooks Baldwin is the guy that you put him in the outfield in one position or another every single day, and if you need somebody to spell in the infield, he can serve that role as well. But as opposed to the infield, where 3 of the 4 pieces for the future are set, should be 4 of the 4 pieces if you wanted to put Tim Elko into the conversation, the outfield is a mess. And I think that we have seen enough at this point of what Luis Robert Jr. is to know that his arc will improve if he's somewhere else. And we've talked about this repeatedly. his trade value right now is not high. But the interesting thing about where Luis Robert Jr.'s trade value comes in is that he's got 2 club options after this year. If the White Sox feel like they can get a lot for him, it's going to require him playing better in Chicago first before actually trading him. And to me, that opens up the can of worms of, do you pick up next year's club option? And right now, I think the answer to that is yes. So Luis Robert Jr., more than likely, unless he gets hot like nobody else in the next 6 weeks, is probably going to be this team's center fielder for the rest of this year and to start next year, because he doesn't have the kind of trade value at this point that's going to warrant a return that you would want. Now, if you pick up the club option next year and the team control is appealing to somebody else, you can maybe leverage that, and maybe a team gives up a top 10 prospect or two, or a top 10 prospect and then a top 20 prospect, and you can see a way to where the White Sox leverage the extra year of team control in order to gain another asset back. But I don't believe Luis Robert Jr. is somebody that's going to factor into the White Sox long-term plans, and thus they're just waiting until he springboards his trade value back up. Now, he does lead the league in stolen bases, but I don't think that that's nearly as relevant when, and he's drawn 21 walks, so his plate discipline is a lot better than it has been in years past, but he's still striking out a lot. He's got 56 strikeouts and 163 at bats. So basically, he's striking out a third of the time, which is not unexpected given his history. But, his on base is at 270, which is almost 100 points higher than his batting average. The problem, though, is that he is, unfortunately, at this point in time, just not valuable enough to trade on the open market. That's it. That's all for this edition of Believe in White Sox. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you soon. White Sox, 3-game series against the Rangers starting tonight down at Rate Field. Hope to see some of you out there on Sunday. I'm planning to be out at the yard on Sunday. Thanks, everybody. This has been Believe in White Sox on the Believe Podcast Network.